This is the second Sunday in Epiphany, and we're looking at the wedding in Cana. Now, even if you haven't been raised in Christian tradition, just if you've been raised in Western influence, you will have heard certain things of the Bible. You'll have heard about Noah and the ark. You'll have heard about Adam and Eve and the apple. You'll have heard about the birth of Jesus, and you'll have heard about the Feast of Cana. There's all sorts of jokes about Jesus turning water into wine. And in fact, I remember years ago when I was in seminary, someone asked me if I'd gotten to the part in my studies yet where I learned how to do that. It's a real thing. It's fun. There's a picture that goes around every now and again with a wine store with the section missing, and the signage over top says water, and the caption says Jesus has been here. It's fun. But it's also a very significant passage, and so often we're left at the surface read of Scripture that we don't get into a little bit more about what's going on and why it was significant to tell that story. So we're going to unpack the Feast of Cana a little bit today, because it's not just simply Jesus was at a wedding and he turned water into wine and everyone was happy. There's a lot of social situation underneath it, a lot of beginning of Jesus' ministry underpins this entire story. His relationship with his mother is something that needs to be unpacked as well when we look at this. So let's first start off there with his relationship with his mother, because in almost every English translation, Jesus addresses his mother as woman. Now, in the North American ear, that is horrid. My children have never once addressed me as woman. It wouldn't go well if they did. They know better. It's not socially acceptable. But Jesus wasn't from the Western part of the world. He wasn't an English speaker. He didn't even live when these cultures were being created. He was an Aramaic speaker or Aramaic rather, speaker who also could speak Greek, possibly, definitely Hebrew, because that was the language of his spiritual tradition. But he didn't speak English. So we immediately know that we can't read it with just an English ear. So what did it mean back in the day? Well, the word woman, the word gyna in Greek that is used, or goina, I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, basically meant woman, my wife, mother, milady, queen. It was an all-encompassing word of respect for the significant woman in your world. And in Middle Eastern culture, sometimes the relationship between mother and son was the most important relationship going, more important than husband and wife, because it was the sons that made sure the mothers survived. It was the mothers that gave sons life. That's pretty profound. In a culture where daughters were essentially married into their husband's family and didn't really have much connection any longer, the relationship between mother and son was primal. In fact, in much of history, if before a woman had a son, she wasn't considered a full woman. Now, again, don't put 21st century feminist analysis on that. It doesn't belong. This is just the way it was back in the day. And if you look through the Bible, every woman who is crying to have a son or a child at all is crying to have a son. And I mean, Hannah's given a son. Elizabeth's given a son. This is just the way it was done. So Jesus was talking with his mother in that deep relationship that he had with her. And her name is never mentioned, which is kind of interesting in the Gospel of John. The mother of Jesus is referenced because that is her social status. She is his mother, but her name is never given. Joseph is mentioned, but never Mary. So he comes to her and he probably says, "Milady," or "dear woman," or something that is lost in translation, but it certainly was not an insult. When she says, "Go and do something about this, there's no wine for the wedding," he says, "It's not yet my time." What an odd response. Not yet, time for what? Except, of course, we read the Gospels backwards through the resurrection, so we know what time meant. In fact, in the Gospel of John, numerous times, Jesus will say, "Not my hour," or "the hour of," and that pops up over and over again. In this particular scripture, it talks about on day 3, which is a flag for any of us who've read the resurrection, because the resurrection happens on day 3. There's stylistic parallel here. Whoever wrote the Gospel of John, whoever edited it over the years, wasn't oblivious to this. The connection is there. Mary is at the foot of the cross, And Mary is at the Feast of Cana, the beginning and the end of Jesus' earthly ministry. Mary is present. And in this instance, at the beginning, echoing what will happen at the end, she's the one that starts the journey and says, "Son, they're out of wine." Now, wine in that era was what they drank. And we're not talking about necessarily the great stuff that we can get at expensive wine boutiques. It was a way to preserve the fruit harvest. When water was scarce or not in good quality, they had wine to drink. Everybody did. Children drank it, elders drank it. There was no limitation on it. Again, not a Western way of approaching it. So when Mary comes to say, "There's no wine," this is a big, big deal. Not only would the founders of the feast, the family that had invited them to participate, been incredibly socially scandalized by not having enough wine and food for their entire wedding feast, which was a 7-day thing most times. This was not a light thing that they only got together and, if they only have a few bottles of wine left, it's not a big deal. This was a full community. Neighbors came. I mean, Mary came from the town of Nazareth. She was the guest, by the way. Jesus was kind of her accompaniment, and her additional children and his followers all kind of muddled together. I mean, we can imagine that that's at least, what, 5, 6, 7, 8 people? But that's just a fraction of the number of people who had been invited to this event. The social scandal, the dishonor that would have been there if there was not enough. And Mary got word of this. Mary hears about it. Why her? Who knows? We have no way of knowing if she was related to the family, the bridegroom, the bride. We don't know how. She just was important enough to invite. And she got wind of this. And she asked Jesus to help save the embarrassment of the hosts. Mary starts this off. And then we get the symbolism of the resurrection in the 3 days, and it's not yet my time. But Jesus also balks. He steps back and says, "It's not my time to do this. Why would I be part of this?" Interestingly, in the Gospel of John, 4 times someone asks Jesus to do something, and 4 times he steps back and says, "Wait a minute. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm not sure I want to be part of this." 4 times. So again, this is a stylized response happening. But it's Mary who pushes through in this particular one and ignores Jesus, essentially. When he does not respond right away and says, "Okay, yeah, sure, I'm on this," she turns to the servants and says, "Whatever he says, just do it." And as far as we know, she walks away and leaves it there. So we have this image of Jesus, maybe alone, maybe with his followers, who knows, and a bunch of servants who are probably absolutely panicked by this point in time because they're the ones that would have noticed there wasn't enough. They'd only gotten less than halfway through the feast, and here they are running out of something very, very important. And so Jesus tells them to fill these big cisterns, these big water cisterns. Now, these cisterns themselves were big stone jugs that held up to over 40 liters of water. That's a lot. And there were 6 of them. And it's out of these that Jesus just makes the wine appear. And then the servants, of course, we know in the story, ladle some, taken to the chief steward, who may be a member of the wedding party, maybe just the main house servant. We're not exactly sure who he is. Responds to the bridegroom and says, "Why did you leave the good stuff to last? Why didn't you give it in the beginning like everybody else does in their feast and save the garbage wine till later in the feast when everybody's drunk?" Here is another reference to the resurrection. We're not supposed to think about this strictly as literal wine. We're supposed to think this as the nourishment, the lifeblood of the Last Supper that we are supposed to experience through wine. The joy of the resurrection, that whatever we have been served first is nothing in comparison to the wonderfulness of what will come once Jesus has made that passage for us, has made that transition, has provided us with something else, something new, something delicious, something desirable. Why are we satisfied with the mundane when we can have the truly, truly profound and amazing? That's what the Feast of Cana is all about. There's a reason why we stop at the very first miracle Jesus does and have so many references to the resurrection. The entire Gospel of John is essentially proving through various signs that Jesus is God. And this is the first sign. We have this miraculous transformation of water to wine. In us, we have this miraculous transformation from average person to follower. Mary knew. Mary knew what was going on. She knew what was possible. She set it in motion. She pushed Jesus out of his comfort, like so many mums do with their kids. Push them out of where they are into something new, which is a journey that they need to take on their own. But sometimes they're a little scared. Sometimes they're a little too comfortable in their lives. So we as mums have to do that pushing. And Mary was full mum, and she did that. And she didn't listen to Jesus saying it wasn't his time. It's not for us to say it's not our time either. The Feast of Cana can be our encouragement as much. Fortunately, we don't have the ability to turn water into wine as much as it would be fun to do, but we do have the ability to turn ourselves from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Now, we don't do it alone, of course. We do it with the help of Jesus and all the signs and all the teachings and all the lessons that we have over the years. We do it with all the wisdom the gospel has given it, with all the prayers we speak, with all the meditation and listening time for God active in our life, all the messages we're going to receive. But that transformation is possible to all of us. We just have to be pushed out of our comfort zone. We have to know that it is the hour. It is time. We are ready. We can move along now in this journey. The resurrection is at the end of the journey, and that's fantastic because we know that after the resurrection there's even more to come. The time is now. This is the hour. Jesus was ready. Mary was ready. The show has begun. And there's a reason why that is the first lesson that we have. And now we prepare for the rest of the church year, the rest of the biblical story, rest of the gospel. Because all of it is moving towards a time with so much abundance that we will say, why did you save the great stuff to last? Most people serve the great stuff early, but God gives even better stuff after we have committed to the journey.